Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Today is April 7th, 2021, and we will be meeting with Azuraye today to talk about the Collective Coherence Game. Hi, Azuraye, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Doing okay.
Yeah.
Just trying to make sure we're getting everyone in coherence, talking to a lot of people recently, including Zeke and his team there in Florida.
Right.
So have you talked to him recently?
Not in depth, but we've been chatting back and forth. He said that they're there and they're doing like a whole NFT thing now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounded cool.
Yeah, they're getting on it, and there's some people there that are really interested in helping to build it up and have it tested in that community. And then we have Inger-Mette testing the SoulSpark game. And you know, I think that a part of what I've seen in your work with the Collective Coherence game is very much in line with the SoulSpark game, especially for the cohesion of one and how we start there. And so it's really exciting for you to join us today. And I've had the link sent out for Inger-Mette to join us as well. And hopefully, you know, she'll be able to join us. I know that she's getting off work, and so she's probably in transit right now. But anyway, you know, we're recording this for the ability to share this presentation with others within our communities. I'm so glad that you could join us to do this. Thank you, Azuraye.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Just kind of anticipating was to just kind of show you what I've kind of built out so far and like what I have tested and collected feedback on, what seems to be working and things I'm still kind of theorizing about. And then ultimately giving you guys the ability to make a duplicate of this and start actually using it and integrating the SoulSpark game in any way that you see fit.
I love it. And here we have Inger-Mette joining us as well. I just made it so that you can share on your screen. I had to log into the computer account to do that. But now I'm going to log off of the computer account so that we're not wasting bandwidth here. There you go. All right. As well, then I think that it would be great for you to walk through from where you started with the Collective Coherence game and how you built it out. I'd love to know more about that. Yeah. So that would be awesome. Thank you.
Hi, Inger-Mette. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Azuraye.
Okay, cool. So where to start with this? So I'd like to more just share in the beginning how I've kind of come to this and found all this information and why I am utilizing it in the way that I am. And then I would love to also just have time in the end to get your feedback and just get any insight you might have. I would like to say that this is all just a work in progress. Everything that I'm using is just, I'm doing it on the ground and I'm truly building these things as there is like an impact in the system and there's a need for it. So every single time our ecosystem has grown or shaped itself in some way, there has always been some sort of tension point that needs to be sorted out so that energy can flow. And I've always tried to analyze that and really look at that, not just from a systems view, but also from a pathos view of just really how do you connect to the people? How do you really understand where the people really want to be in the system instead of making people fit in a system? So my hope with this is to create a very malleable, flexible system that can adapt to pretty much any organizational structure. More than anything, it's a mindset, right? It's truly inviting players into a new game, and they can only really play the game if they choose to opt in. It's not something that you can force anyone into. It's not really going to work if people feel like they're being forced to do something that doesn't really resonate with them. And it's been this interesting give and take that I've seen in our ecosystem, and even kind of like taking this outside of our ecosystem to test it with other groups. So I'll share with you all the work that I have, and I'll give you a little bit of feedback and insight and lessons that I've learned, because I've definitely made some mistakes of just how to offer people to join the game and getting feedback with that versus really this invitation where people are truly asking to join. There's a very different flavor to that, I found. So I'll share with you some of my pitfalls, the lessons that I've learned, and what I've really felt has worked and what I continue to try to shape and develop. Cool. Let me share my screen. So I've really just been combining everything very slowly into this wiki, starting with the energetic operating protocol. Let me actually bring this up on the Miro board. So if any of you have read the Celestine Prophecy, this is a book that really shaped me recently and has really given me a lot of insight as to how I also think that the world does work. And kind of by understanding this gave me a much better sense of understanding how to interact with people, how to make energy really flow cohesively. And it is really the foundation of what shaped how I wanted to build out a better system that could take a lot of these components and build it into the system so that people could understand them as they went through it, and also felt like it was just the foundation of how we all chose to operate with each other as people. So I'm going to very briefly go over that, but I think it's something that's nice to have as like that baseline. So to me, some of the biggest things are really focusing your attention. I think in today's world that we have really had our attention ripped away from us, whether we knew it or not, whether we were opting into that or not. And by being able to bring your awareness to your attention is really like the very first step. Until you can actually be aware of where your attention is going, that's truly your energy flow. So wherever you focus that, that's what's going to create something in the physical world. So the thoughts that we have, either they're negative or positive, they end up coming out into the physical plane, and we attract or repel forces based on that principle. And if we can really start tuning our attention and our awareness on things, we can actually start seeing these little patterns pop up in the world, whether those are repeating numbers or maybe someone said the same word, or 3 different people said the same name 3 times in like 2 days. Something that starts like clicking something in your brain that says, that's interesting, that happened more than once, or that was a very unique coincidence. And as we start attuning into those synchronicities, we actually start realizing that's kind of a little pathway. If I can kind of pay attention and follow that and really interpret these little patterns as they come at me, you're going to have a much easier time navigating your path, your mission in life, truly identifying your puzzle piece and bringing that to the right spot in the world and the right kinds of people that can help you bring that to reality. So I think that's been something that's really, I've tried to practice every single day. Is I just consistently ask myself, where is my attention? Does my attention need to be where it is right now? And as I've started to do that, I've started to realize that a lot of these patterns that I'm recognizing are oftentimes reflections of larger patterns and systems that I can observe in the physical and the emotional plane, whether you're looking at the stock market or you're looking at land systems or you're looking at how people interact with each other or how they view themselves. A lot of this microcosm level patterns are also macrocosm level patterns. And as you start to bring your attention to these patterns, you can see how all of it really does reflect itself. And it kind of brings this sense of coherence in what seems like a very chaotic world. So that's really helped ground me. Whenever I feel like really incredibly overwhelmed by how chaotic the world feels, I can kind of ground myself in the sense that there is something much bigger, and I just need to zoom out further to see what that bigger pattern is. Because sometimes it's really hard to see it if you're looking right at the pine needle on the tree in the forest in the world. It's a little bit overwhelming. So in that, we kind of start to realize that we do live in this responsive universe. Whatever you put out is what you get back. And something that has kind of happened throughout the world evolving is the way that we all source energy. And really, energy is your attention. We have to feed that energy. Why we all crave attention, why we all are looking for the likes on Instagram, why we're looking for people to validate us. We want to be seen, right? Everyone wants that. And it's part of what's so ingrained in us from our young childhood that depending on how we interact with each other, there are either energy competitions where we're pulling energy from other people, completely unaware of it because we just don't even recognize that that's a pattern. or you can be sourcing energy. And really, sourcing energy is coming from a much bigger realm where you're in nature. You're really grounding yourself. You're turning off your brain that is looking for this external source of energy and starting to source it within yourself and kind of tuning off so you can actually receive something way bigger. And it's been an interesting practice because so much of this is stuff that like I would never talk about this to anyone else until I really felt like, man, I'm kind of seeing this over and over again in my life, in my reality. And other people that I'm talking to are also starting to recognize this. So there's something here, right? And it might be metaphysical, it might be quantum mechanics, and maybe something that we don't really have the words or the ability to intellectualize at this point in time. But there are ways that we can start to see the proof around us. So I want to bring attention to that. And as we start bringing our attention to these patterns that are the ways that we steal energy from other people and the reasons why we do that and where that originally came from, when you can bring your attention to that, you can actually start breaking those patterns, at least the negative ones. And then we can actually start reinforcing the positive ones. That when we're in a group conversation and someone starts stealing the energy of really redirecting the attention, saying, like a one up, someone tells a story and then someone else jumps in saying, oh yeah, I did that, but I did it cooler. And you always feel that in a group dynamic where you're just like, what the heck was that? That was rude. That doesn't feel right. There's something in there that kind of goes against your own moral grain. And we all kind of feel that, but we haven't really made it a normal conversation to identify it or point it out in a way that doesn't make the person who did that feel like they're being ostracized or really removed or stealing attention from them, because then it just goes to reinforce that same pattern. So truly what I hope to bring is a way that we can actually tune our attention, that this idea of meditation, there is a need for calm, soft, passive attention focus. And then there's also a need for external focus. Meditation is something that we can do all the time. It's really just focusing your attention. Where is your attention at any one given time? So kind of implementing that into a system that can really help us all understand the way that we're interacting with each other, the way that we source energy and the way that we share energy with each other to actually bring about more of a group coherence. Because once we understand this, we can actually kind of move beyond language, because it doesn't necessarily have to be words based. It can be just a focus, just a focusing of your attention and a recognition of the patterns around you, whether they're negative or positive. So I do think that there's a way that we can create more of an energetic operating protocol where we understand these kinds of things and we can actually collectively and comfortably bring attention to someone's negative types of energy theft or whatever that might be presenting itself in the world, and focus on that and just say, hey, look, you're doing this and it kind of goes against what you said your core values are. I'd like to just bring your attention to it. Do we want to talk about why? And as we start to do that and normalize it, then it doesn't feel uncomfortable. Then we don't have to all feel like, well, why are you attacking me? It's not about that. It's more about trying to understand, how do we build coherence? And the only way to do that is to really give each other feedback on stuff. You can operate the way you are in life. And if no one ever gives you feedback about the things that maybe rub them the wrong way, you're never going to know that about yourself. And you're going to continue doing these same patterns until someone finally brings your attention to it so you can break that pattern and move through that. That is really where we start to build out that coherence and that deeper level of trust, at least I think. And I've tried my best to operate my own life in this way and navigate the way that I do interactions with each person, trying to think about, how can I give this person 100% of my attention? Everything that I am, create the container and the space to really absorb anything that they're trying to tell me. And ideally, whatever they're trying to tell me, if they're kind of having a hard time getting their thoughts in order or understanding what they're really trying to say, can I help them distill that? Can I help them kind of bring that down and really understand what they're trying to translate so that I can understand it better? Because really language is a sound in a shape that really goes from one mouth and head to another, and it might be interpreted completely differently. Our language has communication errors and flaws. So how do we kind of move beyond the language and really understand that ultimately, if everyone had to write down their ethics code, we would see that most people have ethics that are very, very similar, at least overlapping. And we can probably move through some of the biggest challenges in our world if we understand how much we actually have in common. If we go well beyond the race and well beyond the gender and well beyond any of that stuff, because that's all very in front of you and what you're looking at, but that's not what the true essence of each individual is. Each individual has such a unique puzzle piece. There's a reason that you're here. We've been here over and over and over again, and we're trying to bring down this mission and trying to actually make this happen because we know that there's something bigger that we could actually bring into reality. And the best way that we can really make that all happen is if we are identifying what your puzzle piece is. The very first step is just saying that I have something unique to offer this world, and I'm willing to do the internal work to find coherence within myself so that I can actually find coherence within other people, and that we can actually meet each other's two wholes instead of two halves trying to find a whole within each other. And as we start to build this, especially with teams, that you actually see this incredible dynamic start to form, that people who are coming in that have coherence within themselves, or at least on that path of trying to work through that, that you meet other people that are also looking for that. And then it becomes this positive feedback loop that builds on itself, that there is positive inputs going in and creating greater positive inputs instead of negative inputs grabbing energy and kind of sucking the life force out of you, your own personal ecosystem, or a team's ecosystem, or a company's ecosystem. We've seen this over and over and over again. It can't be extractive any longer. It has to be regenerative. And we have to learn ways that we can be regenerative within ourselves and within our teams and our organizations and our land and every other pattern and system that kind of all coalesces together. So how do we do that? It's a huge question. I think everyone's trying to answer this right now. And I think everyone's got such a unique view and perspective on how to do that. I've listened to a lot of other people. I've taken a lot of little examples and things that I've seen in many different systems and patterns. And I've tried to distill something that I feel like every single time I test it, it seems to hold weight. And every time it doesn't hold that weight, why? I really want to look at this as objectively as possible. This is really not about my ego or what I want to call it or name it or take ownership over it. It's really about how can I create something that is just a container that can work for everyone, that can really be shaped to them specifically, because everyone truly is unique. Your puzzle piece is going to look different than anyone else's. So how do we really acknowledge that, see that, and bring that up, bring it to light? So that's really where it brings me to the very first step that I've tried to identify in this whole process, is really identifying each individual player. That this profile assessment that you guys have both taken, it's really important that everyone gets a chance to really sit down and reflect and ask yourself questions about who you are. Why are you here? What is your mission? What do you really want the world to look like? If we're in this world that anything can truly be built, if you can dream it, you can do it, all these things we've always been saying, and it always seems like maybe that's possible, but it seems like a lot of work. It's totally possible. We're all here and we all have our own little individual game that we're trying to build. We're all building our own individual world. And while we're doing that, it would be really good if each of us was very, very clear about the way that we want the world to look. Because if you can actually get clarity in your mind, then it actually gives you a much better roadmap of what you're trying to bring into the physical plane. Most people seem to be navigating through life where there's no clarity. And I was dealing with the same thing for most of my life. And I'd say, honestly, until like the last year when all this started clicking in, it was the biggest question. I was like, why on earth am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? It's so frustrating feeling like I'm like driving this ship, having no idea where I'm going. And there's no one that I can ask to give me any kind of guidance. And no one can really individually see you. You are your own favorite hobby. You're going to know the most about you. You live in your head. You live in your world. You see through your specific lens. How do we get people to look at themselves and really put that down on paper? Identify who you are, and you get to shape yourself. Truly, if you're putting down on paper who you want to be, that is your highest self that you're trying to identify and bring down. And that is your own role model. You are your own role model. The best version of yourself is that. That's what you really want to hold yourself to, is that standard. And if everyone else can see that that's the standard you want to hold yourself to, I think it makes it a lot easier for other people to keep each other accountable. And that if anyone gets off that path and they're not really working in alignment with their core values or what their world mission is, it's a lot easier to identify that, especially when you have small teams working together and there's trust consistently being built by giving each other feedback. Then it's a lot easier to point something out to someone and say, hey, you said that one of your core values was X, but you really just went the wrong direction with that one. And that really impacted me. And I would like to just bring your attention to it so that we can kind of move through that, understand where that came from, and kind of work through it. Because if we don't do that, then we kind of keep hitting these roadblocks and everyone doesn't really want to deal with the resistance level that comes up with that. So we just say, you know what, fine, I'm going to find a way around the wall. I'm not going to break through the wall and deal with it. I'll just kind of jump over it or kind of pretend like it's not there. And we have a lot of systems in place that kind of allow for that. So it doesn't really help us build up this self-empowerment of being able to build up the strength to knock down those walls. In the beginning, you really need other people to help keep you accountable. And as we kind of go through this whole process, especially with the profiles, we have these assessment tests in the profiles that I've tried to identify the ones that I think I actually get good data from of understanding who a person is. And that really, it helps me start to build out like this mental model of each individual instead of them being a nebulous creature where I'm really just looking at what they look like. I'm really trying to see who is the essence of each of these people. What is the gift that they bring to the world, and where would they feel the most lit up? That way, when you really start to interact with them, we've identified what all the shadows are. We know what everyone's struggling with. We understand what they really love doing and what their skill sets are.
Yes.
Then we have an opportunity. It's a lot easier to say, hey, here's the opportunity we'd like to present you with. Does this feel like it's in alignment with you? And as people have these tools to identify what is and what isn't in alignment with them, it's a lot easier to make decisions, and they can make these decisions with higher and higher accuracy. And what I think I've realized in my own personal life is that in order to build bigger and bigger things that hold greater and greater abundance or risk or decision-making responsibility, is you have to be able to make decisions. You have to be able to make responsible, good decisions that are in accordance with your ethics, with pathos, and your logos. That all of the three of these things have to be in coherence, because otherwise people either don't trust your decision-making ability because you didn't do it right, because it hurt them ultimately. Maybe it was just for like I take small haul or moving company as an example because it's such a simple ecosystem that can help you identify the customer, the company, and the crew. Those are the three things that always have to be in balance. And when they're not, I see the issues arise. I either get complaints from customers, or I hear complaints from the crew, or the company's not making enough and it starts to deteriorate and we don't have enough energy to cycle it back through the system. So by passing that methodology onto our crew, it helps them conceptualize something that feels very ambiguous and large, so that they can actually rationalize why we do the things that we do, and that they actually get a say in the matter because they represent one of those poles. So building coherence in a smaller company like that has really allowed me to see like how energy needs to flow. And when something kind of pops out and you're seeing water spray everywhere, it's like, oh man, that is a massive leak and that needs to be patched. Whose responsibility is it to patch it? No one ever talks about this stuff. Who has to go in and actually do the work to fix the system? And I've tried to make it so that everyone gets a voice in this, is that you give everyone a bit of responsibility that they're capable of taking on. And you don't want to give people too much responsibility too fast, because otherwise the whole system just breaks down. You want to dole it out in little bits that they prove themselves and say, yeah, I can patch up that small leak there and patch that up. And then they do that right and it sticks. You're like, cool, that's amazing. Let's do a bigger patch. And you just consistently give people little bits here and there so that they feel like they're able to kind of consume that, chew on it. It makes sense. They understand how to do it in the future. They can recognize the leaks in the system and patch it without guidance any longer. And you kind of just move your way up there. More often than not, in the systems that exist already, there is no methodology for that. There's no true path that actually gives people the tools they need to take on greater levels of responsibility without it being insanely complicated, very expensive. You have to have a ton of resources and a massive network. And more often than not, we just see this end up being like the 80-20 rule that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and stretching more and more and more, which is why we have the 0.001% versus the 99.999% in the world. It's been the same loop pattern over and over and over again, and it compounds on itself, that the people who don't have anything consistently don't have anything because there is no resources, there's no methodology to actually rebuild your infrastructure of your ecosystem. They don't have the tools to fix the patches in the leaks in the ecosystem. So
not regenerative at all.
Exactly. It's not regenerative. It's insanely extractive. And I think in the beginning, it's going to be a challenge to get those resources down to where they actually need to be. But that's why it's up to the people that can build something, that can take a deep breath and have enough abundance in their ecosystems to identify, how do we build a tool that ideally doesn't cost anyone anything? Doesn't cost anyone anything. And it's really going to take what people have at the ground level with a mix of different skills. And now, especially that we've got the internet, we can identify all the resources in the ecosystems that exist everywhere and very effectively allocate them to the places that they need to go, instead of it being this insanely inefficient system that stuff is everywhere and no one knows where anything is. And I see it on the farm all the time as we buy tools over and over and over again. It's like, why are we doing that? There are already 10 rigs, but no one can find where the rigs are, so they go and buy a new one instead of dealing with trying to find them in the tool shed. So it's this it's the same pattern over and over again. If we could take stock of where everything is, then it's a lot easier to focus our attention and our energy and our resources on where it actually needs to go to patch the hole in the system.
So identify, adapt, and overcome.
Great work.
That's what we do. Yes, great work. And talking about identify, adapt, and overcome. I just want to say that you're doing a good job in this presentation, explaining where you're coming from and how this is about choosing a different model of business operation, community operation, and collaboration, and where it starts from in order to ensure that everybody benefits in this regenerative economy type model. So thank you. Inger-Mette?
Well, I like to ask questions to you. I don't know where I can see on top here, that's quite interesting. Like the focus and the circle of intelligence creates technology, you know, that kind of circle. And then the geometric two, the consciousness, the yin yang, the Chinese aspects of it. So how come, like, where did you get this inspiration? It's just like amazing to see what you've created here.
I think it's just been this very slow accumulation. And I think that, you know, honestly, what I think it is, it's consciousness has layers to it. And the way that we start is our attention. And if you can put your attention on the very first pattern, which is just existence, that there is something to put your attention on, and it's very singular in that muscle building capacity. And then as you master that, you start to recognize that there is really a duality. I can either put my attention internal or external, up or down, black or white, positive, negative, masculine, feminine. You look at the dualities, because that it's a fundamental truth. There is this opposite. There is a binary factor in the world. And it's a very simple pattern to recognize. We have the tools to do that now. And each one of these different levels creates a more complex organizational system that anything can fit into, right? I'm giving a very basic overview of what I think works for me, because it kind of helps me hold all that information in my brain. And it's a lot of pattern recognitions, and they get more and more complex the more variables that you bring in. So if you start with the geometry of one, which is really just your attention on one singular thing, then you can also start identifying the duality of two, the yin and the yang, anything that falls into this binary yes or no. And then it shifts into this geometry of three. Anything that falls in an equilibrium of three can be dumped into these buckets, right? And I've chosen to identify that as pathos, logos, and ethos, because for me, that makes sense. It's something that I can identify in myself. If I'm making a decision that's in my highest integrity, where all three of those things are in coherence and at the highest capability that I currently have with the information that I've gathered, then I feel good about that decision. If it's in the opposite, where I have really gone against my own grain and I've had to make a decision that is really harming someone else, or it is really not logical, it's not really rational, I'm just making it based out of pure emotion, or it's not really ethical, then I feel out of coherence with that. And that to me is discord. And I try my hardest to avoid that. And I try to take in all the information in my ecosystem to be able to make the best possible decisions that benefit the whole. It is a win-win-win. And I do believe that for the most part, there's almost always a win-win-win in every situation, but it really takes a lot of thought. And you have to have the ability to put your attention on all of those variables to be able to get it to the highest point where it really is an integrity for you. And these geometries continue on, and I conceptually can really only hold about up to level 4 in my head and identify that. Actually, I think now level 5. I literally just had level 5 click in like the other night, and it's profound. And now like I feel like I've got like a mesh network where information that comes into my brain, it has somewhere to go. And I know how to organize that data in a way that makes sense. And it doesn't feel like, oh, wow, that was just a piece that was floating off there. And I have to kind of keep it into this area of my brain that doesn't really have anywhere to stick it. Think of like a pin cushion, and every piece of data that's coming into your brain needs to be able to stick into something. And if it doesn't have a good traction and actually get in there, it's not going to stick. You're going to lose it. So my hope is to build something that can be a mental model. Sorry, what were you saying, Lyra? You're on mute.
Memory palace is what I was thinking when you were talking about that, because That's a word used in psychology a lot, either the memory library or the memory palace. And we each have one that we construct within our mind. And it is based on what our perception of reality is, and then the filters that we create. And so if we have more fine-tuned perceptions of reality through the sacred geometry and understanding of that sacred geometry, the more refined and able to navigate through that memory palace we become. Would that be a good way of describing it?
100%. That's exactly what it is. And we've all kind of sort of like hodgepodge made our memory palaces, and some of them are like really beautiful and super organized, and people know how to do that. They've got the tools to actually build the mental model house that they need to live in. Other people have no idea how to construct this memory palace. So it's kind of a hodgepodge, and things are kind of just randomly scattered all over the place, and it's not organized, and they can't find information anywhere. What I would like to be able to create is some sort of mental model that actually falls into this sacred geometry pattern that's actually pretty easy to mentally think about and hold in your mind, that it doesn't stretch it too much because it makes sense and it's logical. It can hit you on like your logic side, but it also hits the pathos because you're like, oh, okay, yeah, now I can actually feel things and identify them in other people. And I have somewhere to put that in the mental model. And I can explain that whole mental model another time because it's actually like a bigger conversation. But it's been the foundation that I've really tried to use in navigating the world for myself. And I would never want to share something with someone else that I didn't feel like was at least holding weight for me. Because if I felt like it was good enough to share with other people, I'd be like, go test it, try it. Tell me if you find holes in the system, because ultimately I want this to be the best it can possibly be. And if you have a better version of it, tell me, because I want to use it. I don't care who comes up with it. I just want to use the damn thing. So I think we're all kind of at that point where we're all saying, we got to find something that works. Anyone who's got it, let's use it. And we're all down to try it. And I think we're moving into this. Like, we're getting to this point where like these people are truly being called. They've got this vision. They're hearing the call, and it is loud. And everyone came to the forefront within the last couple of months. Like, people have been talking about this stuff for years, but suddenly there was like a big awakening where people are recognizing that something needs to change. And if we can really create something, I know it's going to take some time. Like, everything always takes time. If people think it's going to take a month, it's triple the time and double the cost. It's just a fundamental truth. And if we can identify that, at least know that we're making moves in the right direction just by having these kinds of conversations, we are building something. And it's going to take a while to build something that actually pulls like hundreds of thousands of years of incoherence into coherence. How do we, it's not going to be a quick process. So the more that we can beta test these kinds of things on the ground, get real-time data, because now we have technology, and ultimately, like, history has been having, the evolutionary steps have been having over and over and over again. And now we're at this point where it's happening really, really quickly. These iterations are happening insanely fast, and the frequency of which the big developments are happening is getting quicker and quicker and quicker. And if we can come up with something, can you give me 10 minutes? Thanks.
Go find me.
Okay, I'll call you. And if we can come up with something that actually gets people in line and like coherence within themselves rapidly, at least the people who are willing to opt in and give it a shot, like fully try something else that's new, then you're going to see movement in that direction. People who come in and say, you know what, that's not for me, fine. That's not it. You don't have to work with something like this. We're going to find many, many versions of this. It's not saying that this is the ultimate one. It's diversification. It's biodiversity within the field. The more of these different kinds of models we are all trying and beta testing with true real data, because we now know how to do that, the quicker we're going to be towards actually finding the thing that works, right?
Right.
So ideally, we can be able to put ego aside and say, hey, look, we are all collectively here to try to find the best possible organizational system, because that's what we ultimately need. That's why we've seen the collapse of the Roman Empire and all of these incredible civilizations, is because they doubled down on what initially worked and were not willing to be more malleable and adapt to changes as they came. And a lot of their ecosystems were centrally located, and they tried to encompass a very massive area and go further and further and further, which just stretched their resources too thin. And they snapped and contracted back, and ultimately all the energy was lost because they couldn't maintain it. So we're at this point in time in history where we actually get to choose. We have the ability to look back in history, see all of those patterns and what went wrong, And we get to make a collective choice of how we're going to move forward and how we're going to build this arc for this massive flood that's coming. And we all know it. We all hear it. So how are we going to do it? Are we going to bicker and fight and say, this is my plank of wood that I'm going to put on the arc? No, God, just figure out something that works. Everyone ideally should be in the section of the arc that best suits their needs and what they're actually good at and what's going to bring them to life. You're going to have people who love building the physical arc. You're going to have people who love helping organize the crew, helping make the oars, put up the sails, whatever it looks like. There's a lot to get done on this ship. And there's going to be a slot. And if people are willing to come to this saying, how can I help? Not saying, what am I going to get out of this? Am I going to get a free ride on this if I bang some nails in? It's just not how it's going to work. It's not like this arc is really going to be something that you get in on if you pay for it. It's more like you have to opt in. You have to really actively choose that you want to be here because it's your belief, it's your attention, it's what you choose to view as reality is really what your ticket looks like. It's not a price. There's no ticket for entry. It's something that you truly have to opt into and say, hey, I'm here to help in any way that I can. And it's not about me. I am one aspect of a much bigger collective, and I'm here to assist in any way I can. Here are the gifts and the skills that I can offer. And if we can really acknowledge everyone in that role of saying, hey, I see you. I actually see you and I see what you're good at. And I love that you have that skill. And I would love to put you in the right spot and ideally help you identify where the right spot is, so that if you were, you wanted to put up the sails and there's a bunch of people putting up sails, then you could actually go work with all those people and learn from them and build those skills and actually get to do what you really love doing instead of, hurting all the animals and you're like allergic to giraffes or whatever. Like, I'm going a little crazy with this arc metaphor, but that's really what I'm trying to kind of, it's hard to encompass it in words because it's so metaphorical and it's so esoteric in a lot of ways. But if there are ways that we can ground it in a language that kind of gives everyone at least a shape that they can see and visually feel, then it's a lot easier to kind of bring it into reality, because then people actually know where they're supposed to go because there's actually like a route and a path to get there. So I'll kind of wrap this up with just showing you what I kind of have put together as like the first building blocks of trying to do this. So the very first step is really that geometry of one. It's the identification of the self, right? It's really your attention, your awareness on you as an individual, as one component in a whole on in this much larger ecosystem. And you get to do that by creating your own player profile, where you identify who your character is. What are your attributes? What are your characteristics? What is your personality? How do you want to play the game? What game do you want to play? That's the biggest question. And then as we have these new player profiles, it's really identifying who's your core team. And as you identify who is the source point and what are they leading, like you're leading the Soul Spark game. That is your baby. You have put a stake in the ground and said, this is what my mission is. I am here to bring this down and bring it to the world. And you build your ecosystem around that. And you have a first follower. You've got someone who's right behind you. You both are really right in that middle of that ecosystem. You and Nate have a pole in the ground. And luckily,
Inger-Mette is our third pole. We have the geometry of 3.
That's amazing. That's amazing, truly, because the geometry of 3 is where you hit the first level of stabilization, because a third person, an independent party, came in and said, I believe in you. I believe in what you're doing and I can put my energy behind it. And I have all these resources in my network and I'm going to pull that in and we're going to create coherence within our little egg and nurture that. But it takes a lot of energy to find that coherence over and over and over again. It's not like you find coherence once and then it's, set it and forget it. It's a consistent, constant building. You're always going to be building coherence.
Azuraye, thank you again. I will jump into your conversation, and I like to do it with reference to a call that Lyra and I was on the other night. Is it so? You were there, Lyra, with the jazz.
Yeah.
That was the story of the hay. So it was a story about listening and to recognize patterns. Yeah. So the jazz musician is like listening to the da ba da ba ba. So they have this jamming and the harmony and the disharmony, and they kind of find the harmon, the coherent harmonic way to listen. And when that was there, they said, "Hey." So the other thing. So then they play this hey game for 1 hour or something. Mm. So when they recognize that, okay, here we are calibrating our understanding or the musical feeling of the jazz and that jam, then we say, hey, wasn't that great, Lyra. So this is a little bit like a funny metaphor that brings it down. And the other thing, recognize patterns and languages. Today I've been listening to Mesh a couple of times, right? And you mentioned Mesh again. And I know like a co-working space in Oslo with a cool place to be called Mesh. And this kind of mesh network, you know, I like to know what it means for you and in this context. So that's one thing. And the use of it, you're working in your local small setup with your friends, family, you know, this, how the grounding in the soil where you live. How does this kind of harmonic playground play out for example, your parents or your sisters or brothers, if you have anyone, or, you know, the closest of to friends of yours?
Yeah, totally.
And by the way, I'm here to support you fully. I love it.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. And those are great questions. The mesh that you're talking about, to me, I look at that as like it is that mycelial network. It is this mesh, you know, there's a digital sphere of the mesh and there's the physical sphere of that mesh. And it's really these threads of trust that really get woven between all of us. The more that we communicate, the more that we collaborate and we build things and we deal with issues particularly, and we find ways to move through them, that builds trust. That builds binding, gravity towards something that says, I'm willing to deal with whatever so much. And of course, and for me coming back here, I was saying again, and coming home to my family was probably the most fascinating thing. My dad had passed away about 2 years ago, and it was just my sister and my mom living at home together. And I think that there was a lot of trauma that had kind of come up, and me coming back was pretty impactful of just understanding that I think I had a role to play in trying to sort out the energetics of the home, because that was my closest node. That was really my first team, right? And that if I couldn't be in coherence with my family, there was no way that we were going to build this entire thing. So a lot of the first couple of months of just being home was working through a lot of their stuff and working through my stuff and things that were coming up, and really identifying and bringing our attention to the way that we were maybe redirecting energy or interrupting each other or doing this thievery thing, because we're pretty lucky to be in Boulder, and like we grew up around the woo community. This was very much like a part of our world, but we were still doing these same patterns. And I was just recognizing again and again these patterns and just trying to bring attention to it, saying, hey, you know, you did this and that kind of made me feel this way. Is there something we can do to maybe prevent that from happening in the future? And just by being very logical about the pathos, it made it something that people could kind of wrap their heads around, and they could actually recognize it, put their attention on it, and solve it. So it's kind of been my method of navigating the world right now, especially with this massive project. And honestly, like a year ago, I never would have felt qualified to run a whole regenerative farm project. I don't know anything about farming. I don't know anything about running land management or pretty much anything that was on here. I don't know anything about machinery, but I know people, and people are the same no matter what ecosystem you're bringing them into. They've got their feelings, they've got their logic, and they've got their ethics. And if you can kind of bring people up into the highest version of themselves, really identify, maybe, you know, your logos was a little bit low in that decision-making process when you were leading a project, or like the ethics of making that decision wasn't totally in alignment with everyone else's ethics. And that kind of, you know, hurt a little bit. And can we bring the attention to that so that people are made aware of it so that they can break that pattern going forward? So I think that's a lot of like what I do on this property is honestly, I feel like an energetic engineer. Like I'm literally just straightening out all the wires so that people can actually communicate with each other or communicate through me to each other if it's like a really bad tension, and trying to make sure that everyone can be in coherence. And it's not necessary that everyone even go through this process. Most of the people on the farm have not completed a profile or done any of the coherence work that I'm working on, because I'm here to kind of hold that space of making sure the energy flows, but it can be incredibly draining. And it's a centralized point because everything relies on me. If I were to walk away, the whole ecosystem would fail. So my job ultimately is to fire myself as quickly as possible. I'm trying to build out the system so that I can actually get myself out of it, and that it still maintains itself and stays afloat, and everyone still is enjoying the process of building this whole thing without me having to be here directing everything, right? So that's really where I've tried to come up with a lot of this framework stuff. And I've been working on this with, like, the geometry of one really being this attention focus. You focus on yourself first as your first piece of this bigger puzzle. You do your profile. We look through that profile and really assess it together. Then you come in with a geometry of 2 to 3, whereas you actually are starting to build coherence. There's actually an exchange going on. Maybe it's me and 2 people who are working on their own ecosystem, and I'm kind of sharing all this knowledge that I'm trying to give to them so that they can build coherence in their own ecosystem, and they can pass that knowledge on down the line. That ideally I wouldn't actually have to be a part of that next iteration. So an example of this is we've got the people who are doing all the work on our farm. I have an energetic exchange with them that once a week we meet for 2 hours, and we're going through this process. We're actually going through the process. They have both filled out the profiles. We have an energetic agreement in place of what they offer and what I offer and how often we meet and what all the expectations are and when we check in. And we do these one-on-ones, and in exchange, they cook for me. So they make this incredible food that they've grown on their land, and they meal prep for me for a week. So that's a massive value to my ecosystem, because otherwise, if any money that they wanted to pay me, that goes into some external ecosystem, Walmart or Whole Foods or something else that gets my money of the work that I've put in, and I get subpar food. Whereas if I can put my energy directly into their ecosystem, help them in a way that they really need it so that they can have more abundance and time, and they understand how their ecosystem actually needs to function, and they can give something that they love doing. They love cooking. They love gifting food to other people because that's something that they can create, and they have value in that. And there's this value exchange that after we leave this, we create these we fill out these feedback forms. And I gotta say, it's like the most beautiful thing is after you leave one of these exchanges where everyone just got to really contribute their gift to the world, of where I really got to be lit up and seen in my power, because this is something I love doing. And I got to taste the food that they've created and put a lot of love into. There's so much appreciation and there's so much love and gratitude that has been gifted to each other. And we get to capture this in this little feedback form. And each party fills this out, so we get to see, like, what did you feel like this was valuable on logos, pathos, ethos, and espiritu, which I'm thinking of like awareness level. What did you gain from this? Was it valuable? And I want people's honest feedback, because if I can't get honest feedback about this stuff, it doesn't hold any real value. I don't want them to sugarcoat it. I don't want them to say, oh yeah, everything was 5 stars, when in fact they didn't feel like it made a lot of sense when we went through this process, or they were a little bit confused. I need to know those kinds of things so that we can improve the system. And they know that. They know that they have opted into this to help build it and to make it more coherent so that they can actually learn how the system works. And now this upcoming Tuesday, we're actually sitting down with their entire crew. They've got a whole team of interns that live on their property and are helping them build this farm. And they're having everyone else go through the profile assessment. We're going to sit down and analyze that with each person. We're going to do our collective coherence chart, which is that big bullseye thing I showed you guys. I'll actually show you that real quick. So we fill this out. And we went through a couple practice rounds where we really analyzed what their entire ecosystem looks like. And it's complex. It's a massive, massive ecosystem with a ton of different pieces. And if we hadn't gone through this process to really organize it and distill it, they would be putting their energy in all the wrong places because they just weren't able to understand what the ecosystem looks like and where their energy really should be placed. Where should you be putting your attention and when? And how can you outsource that attention focus to other people who are totally qualified to do it, but they just don't understand what the expectations are, right? So now we're at this next step in the process where I've now gifted them all the tools that I have at my disposal and run them through the process and hope that they now understand it well enough that they can actually do the collective coherence chart with their team. And I'm going to be there on Tuesday to kind of show and talk about this whole thing and have one of the leads actually do the whole collective coherence chart with their team. So ideally, this information has now moved from my head, to their team, to then further and on in every single ecosystem. That way it slowly propagates And we create this biodiversity in the field because everyone's going to have a slightly different take on how to present it, but at least it's now a malleable framework that can exist that helps people understand what is going on, where are all their resources, who is in a lead position, who's in a core team, technician, or advisory role, and are we deficient in some way? Like we did this process with them last week and we identified, wow, these two people are taking the lead roles in every single thing, in every aspect of their ecosystem, and they don't have anyone in their core team that they can rely on to help them move the projects forward. So our goal now is actually to identify in their intern team who can actually move from a technician into core team and start taking on greater responsibility so that eventually they can fire themselves from that specific ecosystem and it finds stabilization and equilibrium and they can work on bigger projects. So the whole goal is to just continuously move it all forward with coherence in a way that it's stable, that it can still propagate and stand on its own legs without someone having to micromanage every single little variable and piece of information that flows through the system. So yeah, that's essentially where I'm at with this right now. I've got like 4 energetic exchanges going on right now of just kind of teaching people and walking them through this whole process just so I can get feedback about whether or not this works. And it's been really beautiful. It's been so much fun and all of us walk away feeling super whole about it. And we're actually collecting data, which I think is probably one of the most important things, is we're capturing the value that's been created here so that we can actually analyze it and see how do we actually continue to build this out in more of like a software level when the time comes. Okay, I think that's everything.
Thank you so much, Azuraye, for sharing your work with us in the Collective Coherence Game. And I see that you're doing some more work on the goaljam.wiki site, which is great. The more that we're able to share this information through that portal, and it's going to be upgraded soon. It's going to go to the Mega Wiki project that we're part of developing. And so this is going to be more simple for people to engage, to create their diaries basically of what they're thinking of when they're going through your game, the Soul Spark game, and any other game out there that's helping with these issues of collaboration, coherence, and personal empowerment. I think that's a big part of this. Is everybody right now is feeling really down. They've been told they can't do things that they used to be able to do. They don't feel like their work is being honored, recognized, and utilized in the appropriate manner with the proper spirit of intent. And the more that we can get people to engage in this self-reflection and team reflection type model, I think it's going to be that much more cohesive for all of us. What did you think about the new updates on the Soul Spark game? Have you been able to look at that?
I still haven't. I'm so sorry. We have a planting event in 2 weeks and I've had all my attention on getting that thing up and running. But after that, I think I should have the bandwidth to actually come back and like revisit a lot of this stuff. At that point, I promise I will go through it.
Well, one of the things we're trying to do here is make it more simple for people to onboard, so they're not going through question after question after question. We've set it up so there's like the basic questions similar to the ones that you have on your questionnaire for profiles, and just have it on this one page that they just answer right off the bat. And then from there, the opportunities expand depending on how you want to explore. So we have the individual Soul Spark board, and then we have the team Soul Spark. So if you as an individual make your Soul Spark and then you're identifying that on the individual board that there are others that have similarities, and you know, this is something that is just a representation. It's not like telling a person's whole story. The point you were talking about, everybody has their own puzzle piece. So this is like showing that puzzle piece in a visible way, and being able to look at the symmetry of one, and then this how we can go to the symmetry of 2 and to 3 and so on, based on these basic values, like you were saying earlier, those value systems that we all have a similarity in, honesty, integrity, love, justice, prudence. And we have some more that we're going to be creating, because the virtues in action, as it's now being titled, which is slightly removed from the original college that put it together, which is VIA, Virginia Institute. I forget what the A stands for, but you know, it's adding on to that. We want people to add on to that and be able to put these connections between, like, the coherence of one and the coherence of two, and see how that can be visualized. And so these are those different lenses, and you've done a super awesome job. I'm glad to see that you're putting it into action on the ground. We need to be testing all of these out more and more, seeing where we can find coherence between the different models too. That's where the diary comes in. Inger-Mette started the Soul Spark diary log on Gold Jam for people to.
Yeah. But then again, to really, what is like the connection between the Soul Spark game and the coherence exercise to really know yourself?
Yes.
And then know yourself, mirroring in a second person, and then grounding in a threesome.
Yes.
And then to have that kind of being able to work together, to be able to work and to really be dynamic together. It's like the harmonizing. It's like a first step to harmonizing before you really start knowing your virtues.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there is some kind of what. So that there's another thing, Azuraye. Have you been trying this piloting this harmonizing and exercise with Chinese people or Indians that is really, or poor people like in a disprivileged situation, like for example in my friends in Zimbabwe, that is really like let's get a thing done, because we need money, we need food, so there's no time to play.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is there any reflections on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, this has to be my last question. I have another person waiting to see the farm. But that's my ultimate dream. I think right now it's kind of it's a privilege to get to play, which feels shitty to have to even say, but it's true. But I hope that it's bringing the right kinds of people together in the beginning. And it doesn't necessarily take a ton of money to play, but you have to have at least enough of an abundance in your ecosystem that you can breathe so that you can kind of play this different game. The people who don't have any of that right now, it's really, really tough to ask people to sit down and, fill out this worksheet and get to know yourself, because it's not about that. It's about survival mode. And I don't have the solution for that yet, but it's something I'm thinking about. And it's something that I want to bring to everyone in the world. And so much of what I love in the world is doing this cross-cultural bridge building. And that if you really think of like, everyone's got their own culture. You as an individual have your own micro culture. And if we can just start to figure out how to cross the culture between us as individuals, I think we'll start to be able to build this so that it actually builds out this mycelial network at this horizontal level, that it doesn't have to be vertical any longer. Because really, if you do think about this 6 degrees of separation between every single person in the world, if those people can figure out coherence within themselves, you can do that within your micro network. 5 people, max it out at 5 people. If you can find coherence within 5 people in your world, and they don't all have to be working together, you're at least bringing that energy to other people that can then propagate that off to other people, right? And then it actually kind of creates this circular effect. But it has to start with everyone as an individual. We're not going to be able to get all the plastic out of the ocean and all the other things we want to do if we can't figure out how to straighten ourselves out first. And that's where I think we're getting so stuck right now. And it's wonderful to have all these systems and all these nonprofits and organizations in the world that are doing these things, but no one's talking to each other. And if you watch Seaspiracy, watch some of these things on Netflix, the people that are at the ground level making decisions are not talking to any of the other people in the ecosystem and actually understand holistically what the heck is going on. So we've got people who are mobilizing a ton of resources in one direction without actually understanding how does that domino effect ripple out and affect every single person in the ecosystem. No one's talking to each other. So our first step is literally just practice this with yourself and understand how to build coherence with yourself. And then that way we actually create this network effect where we're all actually talking the same language. And that language will transcend any of the actual spoken language because we have a mental model that all looks the same. Doesn't matter what culture, what language you're speaking, because it's sacred geometry, it's math, right? It's the math of the mind, essentially. If we can do that, that transcends all the verbal languages, then we actually have a way to connect with each other that is far better of a methodology that gets that much closer to something like telepathy than what we currently have in any kind of system. And the technology can only facilitate that. The technology cannot be that.
Well, thank you, Azuraye. It's amazing. I love your work, and I'm here to support you in many ways and in the best possible way I can as well. Together with Lyra and Great Works Alliance.
Awesome.
It's cool.
Awesome. Just send messages in that group chat. Definitely happy to just keep chatting about it.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Azuraye. You have a great day.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot. Thanks
You too.
thousands. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.